Sarah loved antiques. She scoured flea markets and antique shops, searching for hidden treasures. One rainy Saturday, Sarah wandered into a dimly lit shop. Her eyes fell upon a porcelain doll nestled amongst dusty furniture. Its glassy blue eyes seemed to follow her every move. Intrigued and strangely drawn to the doll, Sarah decided to buy it. The shopkeeper seemed hesitant, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and warning. "Be careful with this one," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah, dismissing his warning as mere superstition, paid for the doll and left the shop. Little did she know, she was inviting something sinister into her life. As soon as Sarah placed the doll on her bedside table, the atmosphere in her apartment shifted. A cold draft seeped through the room, despite the summer heat. Sarah tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, attributing it to her imagination. The nights that followed were far from peaceful. Sarah would wake to the feeling of being watched, her eyes snapping open to find the doll's gaze fixed on her. She started hearing whispers at the edge of her sleep, faint murmurs that sent shivers down her spine. Objects started moving around the apartment. Her keys, which she always kept on the hook by the door, were found on the kitchen counter. Fear began to creep into Sarah's heart, a growing dread that she couldn't shake off. Sarah was sure of it now. The doll was moving. Panic began to set in. Sarah couldn't deny the strange occurrences any longer. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant state of fear. Desperate for answers, Sarah began to research the history of haunted objects. She delved into online forums, her fingers frantically typing questions into the search bar. The more she read, the more convinced she became. The doll wasn't just an antique, it was a vessel, a conduit for something dark and sinister. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of the curtains sent shivers down her spine. Sarah felt increasingly isolated, trapped in a terrifying reality that no one else seemed to see. She knew she had to do something, to break free from the terrifying grip of the haunted doll. Days turned into sleepless nights as Sarah dug deeper into the history of the doll. She discovered that the antique shop where she'd found the doll had a reputation. Locals whispered of its previous owner, an eccentric collector who vanished without a trace. Sarah's research led her to a dusty library archive. There, she unearthed a collection of old newspaper articles, their pages brittle with age. The articles spoke of a young girl who had died tragically a century ago, her favorite porcelain doll clutched tightly in her lifeless hand. The doll, described in chilling detail, matched Sarah's doll perfectly. They believed the girl's spirit was trapped inside the doll, unable to find peace. Fear gave way to a chilling certainty. She had to get rid of the doll. Desperate, Sarah sought help from a renowned paranormal investigator, Dr. Emily Carter. Dr. Carter, a woman with steely gray eyes and a calming presence, listened intently as Sarah recounted her harrowing experience. She examined the doll, a look of grave concern crossing her face. Dr. Carter confirmed Sarah's fears. "The doll is indeed a conduit," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's become a vessel for a spirit unable to move on." Dr. Carter explained that the spirit was tethered to the doll, its energy feeding off Sarah's fear. "We need to sever the spirit's connection to the doll," Dr. Carter stated. "It won't be easy. The spirit is deeply attached, and it won't relinquish its hold without a fight." Sarah felt a surge of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness that had enveloped her. Dr. Carter explained that they would need to perform a ritual, a cleansing ceremony to sever the spirit's ties to the doll. Dr. Carter explained that the ritual was not without risks. The spirit, desperate to maintain its grip on the physical world, might resist. The doll, its porcelain face now a mask of malevolence, seemed to pulsate with an eerie energy. Dr. Carter began to gather the necessary items: candles, salt, sage, and a silver locket that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. The locket, Dr. Carter explained, would serve as a beacon of light, guiding the lost spirit towards peace. As evening descended, casting long, ominous shadows across the room, Dr. Carter began the ritual. She lit the candles, their flames flickering in the growing darkness, and arranged the salt in a circle around the doll. Sarah watched, her heart pounding in her chest as Dr. Carter moved with a practiced grace. The scent of sage filled the air, a pungent aroma that Sarah hoped would drive away the darkness. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable tension filling the room. Dr. Carter began chanting in a language Sarah didn't understand, the words ancient and powerful. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist, as if alive. The doll trembled violently, its porcelain limbs rattling against the wooden table. The whispers intensified, morphing into blood-curdling screams that seemed to claw at the edges of Sarah's sanity. The temperature plummeted, and a bone-chilling wind whipped through the room, extinguishing the candles. Sarah felt a surge of terror, the raw, primal fear threatening to consume her. Then, as quickly as it began, the commotion ceased. Silence descended upon the room, heavy and absolute. Dr. Carter, her face illuminated by a sliver of moonlight filtering through the window, sighed heavily. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "The spirit is free." Sarah rushed to light candles, her hands shaking with relief and residual fear. As the soft glow illuminated the room, her gaze fell upon the doll. It lay on the table, still and seemingly lifeless. Despite the successful ritual, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. Dr. Carter, sensing Sarah's unease, gave her a reassuring smile. "It's over now," she said, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's trembling arm. "The spirit is at peace, and the doll is just a doll again." But even as she spoke, a shadow of doubt flickered in her eyes. "Be cautious," she warned. "Sometimes, even when a spirit is set free, its energy can leave an imprint." The days that followed were deceptively normal. The whispers were gone, the shadows no longer held menacing forms. Sarah tried to resume her life, to forget the terror that had gripped her for weeks. Yet, a part of her remained on edge, haunted by the lingering feeling of being watched. She had moved the doll to the attic, unable to bear the thought of its lifeless eyes watching her sleep. Yet, even in its confinement, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that it was somehow still present. She found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, her sleep punctuated by nightmares of the doll's malevolent gaze. The once familiar comfort of her home had been irrevocably shattered. Sarah tried to rationalize her fears, attributing them to the trauma she had endured, but deep down she knew the truth. The spirit was gone, but the doll remained a conduit. Fear propelled Sarah towards the attic door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle, her mind racing with terrifying possibilities. She had to know, had to confront whatever darkness lingered within. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The attic was dark and dusty, the air thick with the smell of decay and forgotten memories. As the dim bulb flickered to life, Sarah gasped. The attic was empty. The only thing that remained was a single solitary object in the center of the room: the doll. It sat perched atop an old wooden chest, its vacant eyes staring straight ahead. The doll's once lifeless eyes now seemed to shimmer with an internal light, a malevolent gleam that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Sarah stared at the doll, her blood turning to ice in her veins. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made it difficult to breathe. She felt a presence in the room, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to emanate from the doll itself. The doll's head turned slowly, its glassy eyes fixing on Sarah with an intensity that made her want to scream. The grin on its porcelain face widened, revealing rows of tiny pointed teeth that hadn't been there before. A low growl rumbled from the doll, a guttural sound that seemed impossible for its small size. Terror rooted Sarah to the spot, paralyzing her with fear. She tried to speak, to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The doll began to rise from the chest, its porcelain limbs moving with an unnatural fluidity. The last thing Sarah saw before darkness consumed her was the doll's grotesque face, inches from her own, its eyes burning with a cold, triumphant light.